I still remember the exact moment I decided to let my family destroy themselves without me. It was a Tuesday evening, and my mother had just finished her third glass of wine while listing all the ways I'd ruined her life. Again. The funny thing about being the family scapegoat is that after a while, you start believing it yourself. Every failed business venture of my father's, every one of my brother Marcus's drug relapses, every disappointment in my sister Sophia's life, somehow, they all traced back to me. I was the black sheep, the problem child, the one who brought bad luck to the Henderson family name. But that Tuesday was different. As my mother's voice grew louder and more slurred, something inside me just snapped. Not in an angry way. More like a rope that had been stretched too thin for too long finally giving way. I felt this strange sense of calm wash over me as I realized a simple truth: I didn't have to stay. Let me take you back to where it all started. Growing up as the middle child in the Henderson household meant living in a constant state of blame. My older brother Marcus was the golden child, star athlete, straight A's, headed for law school. My younger sister Sophia was the baby, spoiled and protected. And then there was me, Olivia, stuck in the middle with average grades and a love for art that my parents considered a waste of time. The blame game started small. When Marcus got caught cheating on a test in high school, somehow it was because I'd been distracting him with my painting in the garage. When Sophia failed her driver's test 3 times, it was because I'd made her nervous by existing. These little accusations piled up over the years like stones in my chest. My father, Richard Henderson, was a real estate developer who thought the world revolved around his business deals. Every time a deal fell through, he'd find a way to connect it to me. Once, he lost a major contract because he showed up late to a meeting, but according to him, it was my fault for asking him to drop me at school that morning, even though I usually took the bus. The worst part? I believed them. I internalized every accusation until I genuinely thought I was cursed, that my very presence brought misfortune to everyone around me. I started making myself smaller, quieter, trying to disappear into the wallpaper of our perfect suburban home. College was supposed to be my escape. I got into art school 2 states away, and for 4 glorious years, I remembered what it felt like to breathe. I made friends who actually liked me, professors who praised my work, and slowly started to realize that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the problem my family made me out to be. But then graduation came, and with it, the inevitable return home. My mother, Linda, had been calling me every day for weeks before graduation. Each call was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She'd start sweet, asking about my finals, then gradually work in how much they needed me back home. How Marcus was going through a rough patch and needed his sister. How Sophia was struggling to find herself and could use my guidance. How the family business was facing some challenges, and they needed all hands on deck. I should have known better. I should have trusted my gut when every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay away. But 22 years of conditioning is hard to break, and despite everything, they were still my family. The moment I walked through the door of my childhood home, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The house reeked of tension and barely concealed chaos. Marcus, my golden boy brother, looked like he hadn't slept in days. His law degree was nowhere to be seen, but the telltale signs of addiction were written all over his face. Sophia had dropped out of college and was living in her childhood bedroom, spending her days making TikTok videos and complaining about how unfair life was. And my parents? They were drowning in debt from failed business ventures and Marcus's rehab stints, clinging to their facade of suburban perfection with white-knuckle desperation. Within hours of my arrival, the pattern resumed. Marcus had relapsed because I abandoned the family by going to college. Sophia was directionless because I hadn't been there to guide her. The business was failing because my negative energy had cursed them from afar. I tried to help. God, how I tried. I used my savings to help with bills. I drove Marcus to NA meetings and sat with him through withdrawals. I helped Sophia fill out job applications and community college forms. I even used my design skills to rebrand my father's business, working 18-hour days to create marketing materials that might save his company. But nothing was ever enough. every effort was met with more blame, more accusations, more reasons why everything was still my fault. The breaking point came 8 months after I'd moved back home. I'd been working 3 jobs, freelance design work, waiting tables at night, and helping with the family business during the day. Every penny I earned went toward keeping us afloat, but somehow, I was still the reason for every setback. That particular Tuesday started like any other. I'd been up since 5 a.m. working on a logo design for a client, then spent the morning at my father's office trying to salvage a deal with a potential investor. The meeting went badly. The investor could smell the desperation on my father from a mile away. By the time I got home that evening, word had already spread through the Henderson telephone game, and somehow, the failed meeting was my fault. According to my father, I'd been too aggressive in the presentation, even though I'd barely spoken. I was in the kitchen, making dinner for everyone as usual, when my mother started her litany of complaints. The wine made her honest, she always said, but really it just made her cruel. She stood in the doorway, glass in hand, and began listing every single way I'd disappointed them. I'd ruined Marcus's future by being born and taking attention away from him. I'd corrupted Sophia with my artistic nonsense and made her think she didn't need a real education. I'd cursed my father's business with my dark cloud of negativity. I was the reason she drank, the reason my father had high blood pressure, the reason our family was falling apart. As she spoke, something strange happened. Instead of the usual shame and guilt flooding through me, I felt nothing. It was like watching a movie of someone else's life. I looked around the kitchen. At the dinner I was cooking that they'd complain about, at the bills I'd been organizing to pay with my earnings, at the family photos on the wall where I was always slightly out of focus or pushed to the side, and I realized I was done. I turned off the stove, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and looked my mother straight in the eye. She must have seen something different in my expression because she actually stopped mid-sentence. "You're right," I said calmly. "I am the problem. So I'm going to solve it. I'm leaving." The silence that followed was deafening. My family's reaction to my announcement was exactly what you'd expect. My mother immediately switched from angry drunk to weeping victim, crying about how I couldn't abandon them in their time of need. My father stormed in from his office, face red with rage, demanding to know how I could be so selfish. Marcus emerged from his room, shaking and sweating, accusing me of trying to destroy the family. Even Sophia looked up from her phone long enough to call me a traitor. But their words bounced off me like rain on glass. I'd finally found my armor, the simple realization that I couldn't be both the cause of all their problems and the solution to them. If I was really the curse they claimed I was, then the kindest thing I could do was remove myself from their lives. I packed that night. 26 years reduced to 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of art supplies. As I loaded my beat-up Honda Civic, my family stood on the front porch like a Greek chorus of guilt and manipulation. My mother wailed about her heart condition. My father threatened to disown me. Marcus accused me of being just like our estranged aunt who'd abandoned the family years ago, the aunt, I suddenly realized, who'd probably just gotten tired of being blamed for everything too. Sophia was the last to speak as I got in my car. She pressed her face against my window, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "You're really going to let us burn?" I looked at her, my baby sister who was 23 years old and had never taken responsibility for a single thing in her life, and nodded. "I'm not the one holding the matches," I said, and drove away. The first few weeks were the hardest. Not because I missed them, but because I kept waiting for the sky to fall. My entire life, I'd been told that I was the problem, that everything would fall apart without me there to blame. So I kept expecting my new life to crumble, for the curse to follow me wherever I went. Instead, something amazing happened. Nothing went wrong. I found a small apartment 3 hours away, in a city where no one knew the Henderson name. I got a job at a design firm that actually valued my work. I made friends who didn't spend every conversation telling me what a disappointment I was. For the first time in my life, I discovered what it felt like to exist without the constant weight of blame on my shoulders. The calls started almost immediately. Dozens of voicemails from my mother, each more hysterical than the last. Text messages from my father demanding I return home immediately. Marcus sending long, rambling emails about how I was killing him with my selfishness. Sophia posting passive-aggressive TikToks about fake family members who abandon you when times get tough. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I changed my phone number and made my social media private. If I was the curse they claimed I was, then I was giving them exactly what they'd always wanted, a life without me in it. 3 months passed before I heard anything concrete about how they were doing. The news came from my cousin Janet, who'd always been sympathetic to my situation but too afraid to speak up. She called me on my new number. My best friend from college had given it to her, to update me on the family situation, and what she told me was both exactly what I expected and somehow still shocking. Without me there to blame, my family had turned on each other like hungry wolves. According to Janet, the implosion had been spectacular. Without their favorite scapegoat, the Hendersons had to face the uncomfortable reality that their problems were actually their own fault. The family dynamics, held together for so long by their united front against me, crumbled within weeks. Marcus, no longer able to blame his addiction on my negative influence, had to confront the fact that he'd been using drugs since high school, long before I was old enough to be anyone's bad influence. Without me to drive him to meetings and clean up his messes, he spiraled hard. My parents, forced to see what their golden child had become without the convenient distraction of blaming me, finally had to admit that their enabling had destroyed him. The resulting fights were explosive, with years of buried truths coming to light. Sophia, stripped of her favorite excuse for her failures, lashed out at my parents for babying her. She'd apparently had a spectacular meltdown when my mother suggested she get a job, screaming about how they'd ruined her life by never making her take responsibility for anything. The irony was lost on no one except them. My father's business, already hanging by a thread, finally collapsed. Without me there to work for free and somehow simultaneously sabotage everything, he had to face the reality that he was simply a bad businessman. He'd over-leveraged, made poor investments, and alienated clients with his arrogance. The family home, the shrine to their perfect suburban life, was in foreclosure. But the most telling detail Janet shared was about my mother. Without me there to blame for her drinking, she'd had to confront the fact that she'd been an alcoholic for years. The family had been forced to stage an intervention, which had gone about as well as you'd expect. She'd accused them all of betraying her, of being ungrateful, of ruining her life. All the things she used to say to me. "It's like watching them burn their own house down," Janet said, her voice a mixture of sadness and disbelief. "They keep looking for someone to blame, but there's no one left but each other." I listened to it all with a strange sense of detachment. These people who had defined my entire existence, who had shaped my self-worth around their need for a scapegoat, were destroying themselves without any help from me. The curse they'd insisted I carried had been inside them all along. That was 2 years ago. In that time, I've built a life that I never thought was possible. I have a successful career as a creative director, a circle of friends who actually celebrate my successes instead of resenting them, and most importantly, I have peace. The constant anxiety that used to live in my chest, the voice that told me everything was my fault, has finally gone quiet. I've had to do a lot of therapy to undo the damage of 26 years of gaslighting and emotional abuse. Learning to trust my own perceptions, to believe that good things could happen to me without waiting for the other shoe to drop, has been the hardest and most rewarding work of my life. Sometimes, I still hear about my family through the grapevine. Marcus went to prison for theft. He'd been stealing from my father's company for years, another thing they'd somehow never noticed while they were busy blaming me. Sophia moved in with a boyfriend who treats her exactly like my parents did, enabling her refusal to grow up. My parents divorced, each blaming the other for the loss of their house, their business, their children. My mother lives with her sister now, still drinking, still playing the victim. My father rents a studio apartment and works as a sales associate at a hardware store, a far cry from his glory days as a successful businessman. They still try to contact me occasionally. Every few months, I'll get an email to my work address or a message passed through a mutual acquaintance. The messages are always the same, demanding I come home, insisting that family is family, painting themselves as victims of my cruel abandonment. They've never once apologized or acknowledged the years of blame and abuse. In their minds, I'm still the problem, only now I'm the problem who got away. But here's the thing I've learned, being someone's scapegoat is a choice. Not at first, when you're a child and have no power to leave, but eventually, staying becomes a choice. And I chose to stop. I chose to let them face the consequences of their own actions, to solve their own problems, to find someone else to blame, or maybe, just maybe, to finally look in the mirror. The title of my story might sound harsh, I let them burn alone, but the truth is, I didn't light the fire. I didn't even fan the flames. I simply stopped letting them use me as a firebreak, stopped absorbing all the heat and damage meant for them. I stopped being their excuse for why their lives were falling apart and let them face the truth that they were the architects of their own destruction. I won't lie and say it's been easy. There are days when the guilt creeps in, when I wonder if I should have tried harder, stayed longer, sacrificed more. These are the moments when I have to remind myself of a fundamental truth. You cannot save people who are committed to their own destruction, especially when they're determined to drag you down with them. My therapist once told me something that changed my perspective entirely. She said, "You were not born to be your family's sacrifice. You were not put on this earth to absorb their failures and reflect them back as your own. You deserve to live a life where you are valued for who you are, not blamed for who you're not." Those words saved me. They gave me permission to stop trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed, to stop accepting blame for things that were never my fault, to stop shrinking myself to fit into the tiny box they'd created for me. The last time I saw my reflection in a store window, I almost didn't recognize myself. The person staring back at me stood tall, smiled easily, and carried herself with a confidence I'd never had when I was the Henderson family scapegoat. This person had her own successes, her own failures, her own life that had nothing to do with being someone else's excuse. My name is Olivia Henderson, and I am not the reason my family's life fell apart. I know that now with a certainty that runs bone deep. They broke themselves against their own dysfunction, their own refusal to take responsibility, their own need to have someone to blame. All I did was step out of the way and let gravity take its course. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who recognizes the weight of being the family scapegoat, I want you to know something. You are not responsible for other people's failures. You are not the cause of their problems. You are not obligated to stay and absorb their blame just because you share DNA. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to leave. To remove yourself from the equation and let them solve for X on their own. They might surprise you and actually figure it out. Or they might burn everything to the ground. Either way, it's not your fire to put out. My family blamed me for everything, so I gave them what they claimed to want, a life without me in it. Turns out, I wasn't the problem after all. I was just the convenient excuse that kept them from looking in the mirror. And when I left, all they had left to see was themselves. The fire they're burning in? They lit it themselves, tend it themselves, and feed it with their own choices every single day. I didn't let them burn alone out of cruelty or revenge. I let them burn alone because it was never my fire to begin with. And me? I'm 3 hours away, building something beautiful from the ashes of who they told me I was. Turns out, when you stop accepting blame for everyone else's problems, you finally have the energy to create solutions for your own life. That's not a curse. That's freedom.